Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. So, something struck me as I was looking through the lore of this season. In particular, I was looking through things about the sword logic and how the actions of individuals are driven by motives, and often that means that they empower certain hive gods just by doing those things. Xivu Arath, for example, tried to lay a snare for us in the Season of the Seraph. It was kind of ingenious. That trap was all based around her power as a god of war. All war empowers Xivu Arath, and with this fact in the universe in play, she laid a trap that required us to either control and use the warsats against her forces, thus assuring her victory because we would tithe her and she would be able to open up a portal to the rest of her armies, or we would allow Xivu to use them and she would just use them to destroy us. It was this kind of brilliant back and forth, and it really shows that power of a hive god's individual aspect. Either way, the circumstances would have been the case that so much war would have been enacted that her brood would have been summoned into reality above Earth. The only option that she didn't anticipate was for us to simply not partake and destroy the warsats and Rasputin. Xivu assumed that our only options were war or retreat, but she didn't see the potential for removing the deadly weapons from play entirely. We had outsmarted her here, but that was hard to do. Rasputin literally died for this. With such absolute aspects as war and violence, or trickery and deceit, it isn't hard to see how the hive gods might regularly put their enemies in a lose-lose position, where no matter their course of action, their defeat is pretty inevitable. But there's a question in all of this that I think we should raise. Can the logic and aspect of one hive god be used to trap another? In this video I'm going to suggest that the answer is yes, and I'm going to explain why I think Eris Morn will eventually have a plan in place, a master plan that will trap Xivu Arath just like she trapped us. The only difference this time is that there is no escape from this lose-lose situation. But first, a word from one of our long-running sponsors, Keeps. This is a question for all you gents out there. Have you heard of Keeps before? I imagine that you might have, and if you haven't, pay attention, because at some point in your lives, this problem might affect you. You might risk losing your hairline. But it doesn't have to be like this thanks to Keeps FDA-approved hair loss treatments. They are shown to be 90% effective at treating hair loss that comes as a result of male pattern baldness, and they can help increase hair growth by up to 35%. They're proven to work, and best of all, they're convenient too. You can get them for half the cost of the prices you'd find at a traditional pharmacy, and they can be delivered discreetly to your door in non-branded packaging. As part of your Keeps treatment plan, you will talk to a licensed medical provider who can recommend the plan that's right for you, and you can ask them any question along the way via the Keeps care team and their secure messaging portal. To date, nearly 1 million men have been helped by Keeps, and it has over 4,500 5-star reviews. Hair loss stops with Keeps. For a special offer to get started, go to keeps.com/bife or click the link in the description. That's keeps.com/bife. Thanks again to Keeps for sponsoring this video. Anyway, back to the lore. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of a plane assessment of both Eris Morn and Xivu Arath first. On the one hand, you have Eris Morn, the most recent addition to the Hive Pantheon. She only ascends into a Hive form temporarily, and while she is in that form, she states that she has ascended into the new Hive God of Vengeance. Ultimately, she serves humanity and wants to turn the sword logic on the Hive. That's her goal. It's very simple. She needs to use the sword logic, and she wants to beat the Hive at their own game. She wants vengeance for everything that has happened to her, and she is mantling vengeance. On the other hand, we have Xivu Arath, the third of the Hive gods to rise on Fundament, assuming that they ascended in the order of their age. She is the undisputed Hive god of war, and she serves the Witness unswervingly because it has promised her war untold and to enact that perfect final shape that is promised by the sword logic, something that neatly fits into the Witness's plans without truly involving Xivu. This will hopefully, according to Xivu, prove the sword logic's truth. But what are Xivu Arath's priorities? What are her needs versus her wants? Well, this is where things get interesting and potentially a little bit complicated. Let's go ahead and break this down in the most simple way possible, because the difference between what Xivu wants and what Xivu needs are really important. It is the crux of this entire video, and it is the crux because they are different. First of all, here's what she needs. She has to use the sword logic, and she needs to see it done. This is pretty obvious, it's a no-brainer. Whenever you see Xivu Arath praising you in combat or desiring a fight, this is a direct look at the devotion she holds for that simple logic of the sword. If something cannot exist, it will not exist. The simplest explanation, of course, is given by Umaru and then expanded upon by Eris. This is what sword logic means.
Sword logic is easy. Survival of the fittest. You don't need to dress it up.
It is not an evolutionary adaptation, but a philosophical understanding. Active, not passive. You must prove your right to exist, or else you do not deserve existence. It creates a moral imperative to seek out and destroy everything you encounter.
You have to keep breaking things until you find something you can't break.
Well, yes. That is one way of putting it.
So yeah, the idea is really simple. Much like Eris needs to, Xivu will need to kill and kill to prove that she is strong enough to exist in this universe, to prove that she is the strongest thing in this universe eventually. Because if she does not do so, then she does not deserve to exist. The other thing Xivu needs to seek is war. You see, way back when, the Hive made that deal with the Worm Gods that made them ascend into Hive. In this instance, it meant that Xivu ascended from Shiro into Xivu Arath, and she became the Hive God of War, mantling that aspect. But it was decreed by Yul the Worm God that the price for such an immortality would be that the Hive Gods always had to obey their nature. For Xivu Arath, this meant that she would always need to be strong and to seek war. So, that's what Xivu needs. She needs to conduct war, and she needs to conduct the sword logic. So, what does she want? This is the factor that differentiates her, and I think it can be better explained by some of the stuff that we find in the Season of the Witch's main quest. Take a listen to this old recording that Umaru dug up right after Oryx's death, and just remember, this is probably the most important part of our story because it's not what Xivu needs, it's what Xivu wants. Take a listen.
I heard you Guardians got a lesson in sword logic today. You think you can defeat Xivu Arath with philosophy? Right. Let me show you something. Savathun kept records, and I took a look at what she had on her sister. Got a recording from way back, just after you Guardians drop-kicked Oryx into Saturn's orbit. Call it a primary source for your little research project.
Our brother is dead. I will take my revenge as he sought for his son.
Revenge? For what? The dead deserved to die. That's your own logic. Oryx was a hypocrite, and so are you.
He loved us. He made of our deaths a study. And she, who has endured, who sharpened the sword of his defeat, has done the same. She will take up his mantle. When she is bared to her true shape, we will meet her on the bladed path.
What a vain child you are. Oryx spoiled you rotten. Not everyone wants to be like you. And you won't always get your way.
I will test my strength against her brood, and she will prove our logic true.
Do you see what you Guardians did? Do you see what's happening here? Xivu Arath thinks Eris is one of them, some kind of heir to Oryx. That ritual of hers tied a pretty bow on that theory. This is all part of Savathun's plan. But I can't help wondering, what the hell does Eris think she's doing?
So that whole audio recording has a ton of stuff to unpack, from Eris mantling Oryx and Xivu believing that she will be the next step along the sword logic's path to prove that it is indeed the true and final logic of the universe. But None of that is what I want to focus on. Instead, it's all of those opening moments when you hear the first few lines from Savathun and Xivu Arath. The moment where Xivu Arath gets called a hypocrite because she's going to avenge Oryx's death. That is our hint. This is the thing it all rotates on. It shows us what Xivu wants instead of what she needs. She wants vindication and revenge. More importantly, why does Xivu want revenge? Well, according to Savathun, it's really simple. In the second entry of the 8th Book of Sorrow, we get this excerpt from Savathun's perspective. Part of it reads, "We were the last surviving siblings." That's what this has always been about for Xivu. She wants us all to survive. She would throw everything she could at us so we could learn to survive. Take another extract from that particular passage, which reads, "Poor Xivu's distraught. With all that war and ruin to hide behind, she thinks she doesn't show it. Deep down, she believes Oryx must have survived through their logic. She believes he'll be conjured back just like he conjured us." And yet again, listen to this radio conversation from Imaru, where Xivu Arath says the following.
Revenge? For what? The dead deserved to die. That's your own logic. Oryx was a hypocrite, and so are you.
He loved us. He made of our deaths a study. And she, who has endured, who sharpened the sword of his defeat, has done the same. She will take up his mantle. When she is bared to her true shape, we will meet her on the bladed path.
Xivu does these things because of a very simple Hive principle, one that she believes Oryx carried out in his love of his siblings, and it's this. To the Hive, strengthening something by exposing it to the sword logic, by exposing it to things that will allow it to either be destroyed or to grow stronger, that is an expression of love. And Xivu Arath truly loves her siblings. She loved them and showed them that love through the acts of war that she committed against them. By conducting violence and battle in this way, she would show them how to survive, and if they did survive, that was an act of love, because she had made them stronger. In this way, she believes that Oryx also demonstrated his love to her and Savathun as only sibling deities could, with violence, with the sword logic. In the mind of Xivu Arath, this love through war would find purchase so long as the three siblings survived. The death of Oryx sent ripples through the universe, and one such ripple was its effect on Xivu Arath. The Hive God of War had failed to protect her family. That was the entire point of the sword logic as she saw it. This was the point where she would be able to allow them to survive by exposing them to things that would make them stronger. But sword logic alone was not enough to stop the Guardians. Now, in Xivu's mind, she simply sees us as Toland would have had us be, as greater practitioners of the way of the sword logic. She believes that Eris is mantling Oryx and is ultimately an extension of his logic. Therefore, she kind of expresses a strange kind of admiration and love towards Eris's actions, believing them to be the direct extension of Oryx, an extension that might hopefully summon him back. But ultimately, this doesn't change anything else. Xivu Arath does this also out of a desire for revenge. I believe that this is ultimately what's going to push her towards that final confrontation with Eris Morn. What she needs as a Hive God is to obey the sword logic and to obey her nature, conducting war. But what she really wants is revenge. And there is the trap. So simple and so elegant, but an entire gambit can potentially be built on it. What Xivu really wants, deep down, is vengeance. I say that now because of this really simple point. Xivu Arath, Savathun, and Oryx chose their aspects well. So too has Eris Morn. She has mantled Strife not as the Hive God of War, but as the Hive God of Vengeance. And there is power in that, great enough, I think, to trap Xivu Arath. Eris Morn wants the power of the sword logic so she can take revenge on the Osmium dynasty. Xivu Arath wants the power of the sword logic so that the Osmium dynasty, her family, can better survive. Xivu Arath clutches to the sword logic out of a desperate need to defend them. Eris wields it with the desire to destroy them. Xivu Arath needs the sword logic to vindicate her belief in her brother's death being something necessary. But ultimately, that's not what the sword logic is for. The sword logic doesn't care. It is baleful and beautifully simple and dispassionate. Eris, on the other hand, understands that the sword logic doesn't care at all, is dispassionate, and does not care for the desires of any individual. All must work and fight to survive, and the rest is forfeit. None of it matters. Xivu is going after Eris, approaching her in the ritual manner of Hive Gods because she believes perhaps that Oryx's sword logic will be embodied by the actions taken of Eris and the Guardians. She believes that Eris is now mantling the power of the Taken King and that the Guardians will ultimately honor his logic, perhaps even conjuring him back. But deep down, Xivu Arath has sworn revenge on Eris Morn, and is furious at her for the murder of her brother and other members of the extended family. Her desire to challenge Eris is perhaps based on that desire for vengeance, not on a respect for the sword logic alone. In that archived message again, she admits this to Savathûn, and Savathûn calls her a hypocrite. The sword logic to Xivu is proof of Oryx's love, and is an excuse to go after his killer. The important thing here, however, is that Eris doesn't need to accept that she is mantling Oryx, and in doing so, I think that really kicks the idea that Xivu Arath wants revenge up to 11. And this is the last really important part to understand, which I'm sure some of you may have already connected the dots with, but I'll explain it to everybody. Where Hive rituals and magic is concerned, intent and action pave the way to a Hive God's power because intent, action, and the way that you prepare for something are essentially like the actions of a Hive ritual. We were taught this by Xivu Arath herself. She laid that trap for us in the Season of the Seraph. The act of conducting war, of planning and preparing for it, and of actually taking war to your enemy and striking them down, that is an act of worship to Xivu Arath. And if we had chosen to fire the warsats, we would have tithed a great bounty of war unto Xivu herself. Conducting war empowers Xivu Arath. So what happens exactly if Xivu Arath aims to conduct vengeance? And Eris Morn is the Hive God of vengeance. I think you can see it all now. This is all contingent on Eris being powerful enough as a Hive deity. But if Xivu Arath tries to take revenge on Eris Morn, she, the Hive God of War, will deliver the greatest tithe imaginable to Eris directly. I imagine that in that moment, Eris Morn will be struck down and will instantly become stronger for it because Xivu Arath struck her down out of a desire for revenge. Xivu will be compelled to take that course of action given that the sword logic demands that she should test herself against her foes. And, more importantly, she is conducting war. All her actions, all the needs that she has push her towards this course of action, but the thing that she truly wants, that drives her there in the first place, poisons the well, and ultimately takes this from a great tithe towards herself, and shreds it down into the desire for vengeance, meaning that she empowers Eris instead. And so ultimately, Xivu Arath may find herself in a lose-lose situation. If she does engage Eris in battle and takes her revenge, Eris Morn will only grow stronger. And if she doesn't engage Eris, well, Eris said exactly what will happen to her in this week's story.
Xivu Arath, when this is finished, you will turn and run, and your worm will gnaw at you as if you were a buried corpse. You will have no tribute then, and you will starve.
So that is the theoretical trap, and that's how we spring it. Xivu Arath must kill or attempt to kill Eris by seeking vengeance, and that will be her undoing. The only problem with this will simply be that, well, what if Eris Morn does get killed by Xivu Arath? Isn't the whole point moot then? Well, yes and no. I'm not the first to suggest it within the lore community. I know Myelin has been on top of this topic. But Hive gods have throne worlds, and death is not the end for the Hive. And with enough tribute, Eris Morn would be able to make a grand throne world indeed. And as Eris herself said to the Drifter,
But the Hive are not afraid. They are awestruck. They know that I am vengeance, and they have conjured me back with vengeance.
Ooh, sounds like a wild ride.
I seek to subvert the Hive's flawed logic. I may only do so because of what I am, and what I am not. It is a wild ride.
Hey, I'll be there when you're on the other side of this.
As will I. Trust.
the use of that phrase is unbelievably specific. It is something that was stated by both Xivu Arath and Savathun when Oryx embodied them, fighting in the Books of Sorrow against an empire known as the Ecumene. This is a moment where Oryx proved the power of Hive logic. Someone who was a Hive god, someone who mantled their aspect, would then be empowered by acts of that aspect. Xivu is empowered by war, Savathun by trickery, and Eris Morn is now empowered by vengeance. Vengeance will be the force that propels Eris Morn to power and true godhood. Its potency has provided her purpose at every step of her journey. She will mantle vengeance for all and against all. For Arka's vengeance against Oryx, for Zeta's vengeance against Rulk, for Sel and Asa's vengeance against the Witness, for Omar-Agar, Saimota, Veltalo, Toland the Shattered, and Eriana III, for Wei Ning, for Crow, for Sagira, for Saint 14 and Osiris. She will scratch the names of the Osmium dynasty from the world's grave as a reaper claws the dead from the living. And her own vengeance against every last member of that dynasty will ring true through every brood of the Hive. There are many names she has already counted through her actions or the actions of the Guardians. Hashladun, Besurith, Kinox, Voshir, Omnagul, Malok, Balwur, Dulinkaru, Skoroboth, Zavan, Turbalok, Unragar, Nokris, Uranuk, Urhalak, Crota, Savathun, Oryx, and perhaps soon, at last, Xivu Arath. These names of the dead and soon to die represent a simple truth, baleful as it is beautiful. She is here, and they are not. Her vengeance has outlasted them all. But that is all from me for now. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. How do you think Eris is going to defeat Xivu Arath? Do you think she even will? And what do you think of this potential idea? Xivu has expressed her desire for revenge, and if Eris is powerful enough to be the mantle of vengeance for the Hive, then surely there is a chance that Xivu has worked herself into a trap, one that she cannot get her way out of. And also, let me know this. What do you think Savathun's part to play in all this is? I wonder personally if this isn't a part of her larger schemes. If it is, she's playing a very dangerous game indeed, but that's nothing new for the Hive God of Deception. Again, let me know down below in the comments section, and if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a like. Whilst all of this is speculation, I do hope it's also something that's informative. And if it is, go ahead and let me know by subscribing. Hit the bell next to subscribe as well to turn on those email notifications. But, as per usual, know that your viewership as always is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Parodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.